was in love with the idea of it, and I would try to like make something happen within my brain. And it obviously wasn't going to happen because it's not natural within me, but that it was a really good introduction, I think, to like making it seem something that isn't abnormal or weird. It's just like something that some people can do, and I thought that would be a really good book to introduce people to synesthesia with.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think a lot of people found that the little girl, sometimes in stories about synesthesia, the synesthesia can be represented as something a bit pathological, right? That there's something wrong with this. But in that book, it's presented in a very, very kind of positive way. That this is just, this is just her perception of the world, and it's beautiful, and in fact, at one point when her cat dies, she has a pet cat named Mango, and when her pet cat dies, all of her colors, she loses all of her word colors, and somehow her world becomes a much less colorful place. And then when she works through the trauma of the loss, the colors come back again. So we have the synesthesia represented as kind of representing this kind of wholeness and balance, and so very, very positive view of synesthesia. And I think the author, in fact, won a prize.
Yeah.
He won an award, right? The Newbery Award for that book. I heard it might be made into a movie.
Really? I'll be looking for that.
Yeah.
I have a question. I always think that the way you experience the senses really informs the way you relate to people, both emotionally and physically. So I was wondering what your experience is in that regard.
It's almost hard to say because you have nothing to compare it to. You have no basis of comparison. It's it's not like at this period of my life I didn't have synesthesia and I related this way, and now that I have it, I relate this way. So I almost don't. I'm almost not sure.
I think my question is more about when you relate to someone, if you have a certain emotional feeling towards them. Does that come out a certain way?
So would that represent some synesthetic way?
Expresses itself sensorially.
Right. I think maybe you might have. I don't know. Do you have that form of synesthesia?
It's one I'm starting to get.
Okay.
It's happening in a weird way. None of this makes any sense in the way it's developing. So all I can do is just tell you that people who are severely alcoholic have an aura to me of Pepto-Bismol pink. And now I'm discovering that people who wear glasses have more of a yellow cast to them. And when they take their glasses off, their colors change. I don't know. There's some emotional component that's going on, but it's so vague that I can't describe it.
It's hard to put it into words. But I think there's something about they become part of this inner landscape that's there all the time. But now this person who's become important is somehow now a part of that. So maybe that's my synesthetic way
They used to
of
call it
experiencing that.
words. Now we don't.
Right. That was what I was thinking as well.
Yeah.
But I was talking about the part where I experienced a companion in a yellow cab riding with me in a very beautiful series of moments. The only way that I could find the words, and it's just so challenging because words are so limited, and they're limiting when you're trying to express on things sometimes what you are fully experiencing with someone. Like, what's it like being in love with Joe? Oh my gosh, I don't know, how much time do you have? It's kind of like that with the yellow cab. There were so many things that were happening in a period of what was probably about 4 minutes of a cab ride, that the only thing I could find was a metaphor, of the aurora borealis and, in the northern lights or something like that, Thank you. But still not quite exactly what I experienced.
Okay.
but it's the only way that I can, and that was, to me, that was, he and I, that was our alchemy. So that was our chemistry. He's also a musician who's slightly synesthetic. We've talked about that. So when he plays his guitar, he also sees certain things and experiences certain things on a much more muted level, I would say, than us, but from what he's just, but so when he plays and I listen to him play, there is a whole experience I have there too. But yeah, I mean, that's the best way I can describe it. It's more of an alchemy with people, a chemistry of color or texture or
Actually,
yeah.
the reason I ask that is because, I mean, I'm an actress, so I guess I already think images. But when I relate to people, and I have certain senses that I think are heightened, like my sense of smell is really heightened.
Mm-hmm.
So many times I say people and smells, and
People you see them in terms of like a certain scent?
it's not like I think
Or
of
you
them.
think of them as a certain scent?
Yeah, I think of them as a scent.
Interesting.
And if someone I'm close to, when they has a different scent, I notice it straight away. And a lot of times when I have certain experience with people, I think of them in imagery, and I think, about a wave or, about a certain kind of landscape.
Right. And I mean, you would always associate that particular image with that, or sensation with that particular
Yes.
person. Yeah. Yeah.
And it just
Yeah,
makes me
yeah.
feel like probably.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have kind of a general question about synesthesia. Like, how long has it been identified as that?
Oh, for
And-
hundreds of years, actually.
Really?
Yeah, they've had reports for hundreds of years, but, it was actually very much in vogue, in the 19th century. There was a lot of research on synesthesia, but then what happened was, I guess later we got very interested in, things like behavioral psychology, and if we couldn't observe a phenomena, scientists didn't want to study it. I don't have any way to observe it and measure it. What can I do with that? But then, in the 1980s, our medical technology became very sophisticated, and we were able to do brain imaging. We were able to actually see what is happening in the brain when people are reporting certain kinds of perceptions. So when people said they experienced colored words, they would read a list of words to people who claimed they could experience colored words. I think the first experiments were at the Institute of Psychiatry in London. And they would have this person hooked up to a PET scan, which is a way to do brain imaging. And they would find that not only was there activation in the part of the brain that is, let's say, the language center, where you would expect it to be, but in these people, the activation was also in the color center. So people were sort of somehow experiencing words as colorful objects,
Because the reason I ask about how, I'm not trying to prove it or disprove it, that's not what don't take it that way, but whether it was a joke or not, the two of you corrected each other about how words, you were describing something differently, and one of you said, she's wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Was that a joke?
It was a joke.
Okay. No, I'm just wondering because,
Because it's very idiosyncratic, I
because
guess.
it developed differently with
colored,
each person.
Yeah.
There's
Okay,
no
because to your point, as an actor, a lot of it sounds like sense memory.
Exactly.
And it sounds like, and again, don't take this in the wrong way, it's a glass half full comment, but this sounds like repackaging of something that I think we've probably all had forever.
Oh, I think you're right. I mean,
Okay,
babies who are less than 3 months old, we can say that they are all synesthetes. Because the brain has not yet, as the brain develops, it compartmentalizes its different functions. So that the baby, I'm seeing this, but I'm tasting this, but I'm smelling this. But a very young baby the brain has not differentiated its functions yet. So everything is sort of coming in as a kind of, this kind of undifferentiated whole. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, we all start out like that. And one theory about synesthesia is why this happens in some people is maybe for genetic reasons. The differentiation, the compartmentalization in the brain doesn't fully take place. So some overlaps remain. So you might have, if the overlap is in a certain area, maybe you will not only taste something, but you will also see something when you taste something. You'll also experience, something visual. So yeah, I mean, you know.
They say there are 5 ways that you could experience synesthesia. One, like Pat's describing, you keep it from babyhood. Or you have visions before you get a migraine. Or you get visions before you get an epileptic seizure. Or you're a child of the 60s and experimental with hallucinogenic drugs.
Right.
Which was very interesting to neuroscientists because they said, okay, we know the brain is plastic, but it doesn't make neural connections that fast. What is happening? And the last way, which I find fascinating, if you meditate, you will see synesthetic perceptions.
Well, actually, there was a study done, right? Roger Walsh at the University of California at Irvine. He actually wasn't studying synesthesia. He was studying people in deep states of meditation. He wanted to know what effects long-term meditation had on the brain. And he found, just incidentally, that a lot of long-term meditators would say, oh, you know, that while in deep states of meditation, they would experience sounds as having colors, words as having color, music. They would get these synesthetic perceptions that they didn't normally have. So that's another thing that indicates, you know, we have these maybe dormant capacities. And some things can activate them. Maybe in some people, it's all certain parts of the brain are already activated. Again, maybe for genetic reasons, maybe for some combination of genetic and environmental, we don't know. But to me, what's interesting about synesthesia is just the amazingly, you know, the array of perceptions human beings can have. And, you know, just this sort of dizzying number of ways they can code information, and they can, you know, just the forms their inner worlds can take. I think it's so interesting.
Going back to your question about how long has it been known, I'm not a theologian, but it was pointed out to me by someone who is, that in Exodus, and it's either 19 or 20, Moses goes up to Sinai, he gets the tablets, there's a huge thunder and lightning storm, and the sentence confounding scholars for hundreds of years reads, and the people saw the sounds. So, it's been around for a while.
Well, I think we have maybe time for maybe one more question.
Or comment, or some experience that maybe this has touched off for you.
Well, one thing that occurred to me, one of the frustrations as you try to explain is before, you know, explosion of joy, and you say, oh, it's like the Aurora Borealis. How many here have sat somewhere in the Arctic Circle and watched it? Probably nobody in this world, because we had me neither. And unless you're there, like unless you're, you know, in a symphony orchestra and you're sitting, one of the greatest, you know, that's an experience. Not everybody has the same experience, and so when you try to relate to the experience, you know, that nobody else really, it's you know, it's one of those kind of things that, like you said, it's so hard to describe something you want to, as you can imagine it as well. You know, everybody imagines something completely different.
I actually have a question about that I'm trying to understand. It's a lot of information.
Yeah.
So like I could describe kissing someone I love and that kind of chemistry as fireworks, as a sensation. But is the difference that you would actually see in your inner world, you would actually see the Aurora Borealis?
I love that you brought that question up, Heather. Heather, by the way, was one of my students 10 years ago when I've been teaching now for 15 years now this year. And Heather was one of my students at Virginia Commonwealth University when I taught a graduate level Meisner course and undergraduate acting courses. And now Heather has come back here 10 years later, having also studied at the Actor Studio for graduate school, where I did as well, and we studied sense memory very, very much in depth, which I'm very grateful you brought up that comment, because I had the same thought when I first started exploring sense memory and also emotional recall, and using place, people, objects for that type of sensory and emotional experience for an actor to prepare before a scene. So many of us sitting in this room have training in this, are performers, which is a beautiful thing here, sitting here talking to everyone, because we all have a common language. But the biggest differentiation that I can tell you between a sense memory or an emotional memory experience and being actually truly synesthetic is that being synesthetic and experiencing those things that we see, it's more of in, as I sat here and told you, it's more of in the mind's eye, in the piece. It's more of in the mind's eye. And it's also, unlike sensory and emotional recall or sense memory exercises or usage of those tools, this is completely involuntary. So for us, for people like us, it happens whether we wanted to or not, whether we are prepared for it or not, whether we are sleep deprived or not, whether we're on drugs or not, whether we're, in a state of euphoria or not. And it's different, as I mentioned, every time. Much like sense memory and emotional recall is different every time. In other words, you might do an exercise before you prepare to play Lady Macbeth, and one night it might make you very angry and upset and frustrated and have the need to be loved, and the next minute it might make you full of joy and feeling really maniacal and feeling like you want to hurt someone or put them down. So, I think it's very similar to that experience in the sense that you don't know what result, but you know that the how is always the same. So the how that kind of happens is the same. In other words, the brain is firing in a different way. If you look at my brain in a PET scan, and your brain, you look at the brain of someone who's very much less so of a synesthetic, you'll see that the brain is actually firing in a different pattern, in a different way. So if you and I did a sense memory exercise, and I'm a synesthetic and you're not, I'm going to have a completely different synesthetic experience and you're not going to have a synesthetic experience. But we're both going to do an emotional recall sense memory exercise, and we'll both probably end up bawling our eyes out, hugging each other, telling each other we love each other as actors, and saying thank you so much for doing beautiful work, So, or not, maybe I'll feel maniacal and you'll feel sad. But that's the best way I can describe it, is that, it's very unpredictable. Like exercises we do as actors, I can't say, if I'm a trained, informed, educated actor, truly, I can't say, oh, if I do this exercise, or if I teach you this exercise, you're going to feel exactly this way, and this is what you're going to. And I tell my students this a lot. I say, you don't know what you're going to get, because humans are innately unpredictable creatures. So, I'm unpredictable as a synesthetic, because I really, and that's such a wonderful point you brought up about the Aurora Borealis, because how can I really explain, I really can't feel it.
Being at sea,
Yeah.
the thing about being at sea that nobody really knows unless you're really
out there,
is that you're in the hands of God every day.
You
When you're
really
walking
are.
on land, that's not a problem. When you're out there and the storm hits, it's like nothing you've ever done in your life.
And I was sailing in Annapolis. Actually, I'm a sailing instructor, and I was getting my certification when that college sailor she actually drowned in the same water. So she was not even a mile from me in the same water. So her body was in the same water that I was sailing. To me, that so deeply affected me. It was, and I wondered if she was a synesthetic, what was the experience of crossing over like for her? What was it like? And so anyway, that's what, but all of these things you saw that I have written and performed and through the help of designers and amazing people like my students, this is just all this is our attempt to share it. And it's just in the attempt. And I think Shakespeare and people that have over the hundreds of years written, beautiful works, any artist that we know has had a cross-modal experience, really truly, had synesthetic aspects to their work. Shakespeare talks about the aspects of the moon and the feeling of tactile things in a very different way than, people at that time were speaking about. Marlowe, people like that, emotions as being tastes or, all of that stuff. So.
it sounds like we can all experience sense memory, unless we're really cold people.
Yeah.
Because we have no life. And we all have senses and we all have memory. But it sounds like not everybody can experience this.
It seems like this is more of a heightened thing. I was even thinking how that, you know, almost everyone is.
I just wondered, is that right? That this is something that,
I'd like to jump on that a little.
yeah, because I know it sounds like a simple question, but I just wondered.
No, it's a really complex question. Synesthetes don't agree on the colors of things, let's say letters, for example. But neuroscientists are saying, if you took a bunch of people who are not synesthetic, definitely not synesthetic, and you gave them colors for letters, how many people would choose red for A? How many would choose brown for B? How many? And they're coming up with really stunning numbers. It's way beyond 20% for chance.
We mean,
Meaning a lot of
the same.
people,
That it's the
maybe
same as the
50,
the
60 people, percent rather, are saying, yeah, A is definitely in the red family. Red meaning pink, or red, or maroon, or orange, but in the red family. And I find it very interesting. It's like, what is the carryover from babyhood?
Right.
And
Yeah.
what's the mechanism for causing it to
That's so
happen?
different. You're describing one thing, and it's great, but like sense memory would be like, what's A? It'd be blue because it's what the subway is, right?
Yeah.
If you're a New Yorker. If you're a New Yorker.
Yeah, if you're doing,
So
to
it's like-
clarify for the non-actors who have not studied sense memory in depth, for coming out of these exercises from, you know, people like, you know, Strasberg and Stanislavski, even going back that far, you know, who tapped into the senses. For the actor to access the full environment, they had to have a full in-depth dropping in of the senses, or they wouldn't be able to access these real, true, vertical emotions and feelings and things, really seeing things. So, yes, in a sense, if you're talking about, in my opinion, I'm always going to say in my opinion, because this is my opinion, but in that way, if it's for instance, emotional recall using a place, and you're an actor that needs to access your emotions, you don't feel anything, you just had a cup of Starbucks, you came into the theater, you're in a very good mood, and now you have to play Medea and kill your children, you know, and all of that, but you're in a great mood, you feel really spunky, I don't know. I just feel like you might play a wonderful Medea, and I might be like, I don't know. Please spare me, Mom. But if that's the case, I don't know. I just think maybe make a great Medea, a synesthetic Medea. You know, that if you're used to seeing, if the place you're using as an actor to access that exercise is the subway that you always go to, where you see that the B is always blue, or the ABC line is always a certain color, absolutely, you're going to see it that way because that's what you've actually seen through your optical nerves and all of that, and that's tangible. And that's recalling that place, just like the favorite tree you had when you were a kid in the backyard, right? That tree looks, so that's emotional or sensory recall using a place. Same thing with an object. I'm going to use my teddy bear or a toy or something that I can recall the colors and textures and shapes because that thing really existed. It was really an object that I really touched and I really saw and I really... But with synesthesia, what's so complex, and I appreciate the fact that you said it's it really is a complex question. It's not coming from something you know, necessarily. So I might have never seen the aurora borealis, but when this person and I have this chemistry and certain tactile experiences or whatever, I might have an experience like that in my mind's eye.
It was so great.
Yeah.
It was beyond your imagination. It was beyond your vision. You couldn't, it was so beautiful. It was beyond what you've ever seen. And then
Yeah.
the aurora borealis.
Yes.
Yeah. It would have been so beautiful. It was
Yes.
breathtaking. You haven't seen it.
I mean, yeah.
Like being on Mars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I appreciate those questions because as an actor myself with that training, and Heather, I know you have it too, you know, it's really frustrating sometimes to define it. It's like, what is it? Well, wait, what's the difference though, right? What is the and so this has been really so stimulating of a conversation.
Well, the conversation doesn't have to end. We would like to invite you to continue these discussions. Please seek out And please join me in thanking Patricia, Natasha, and